And finally, with our flexibility training, we're going to have a look at one more format of this flexibility training. Let me drag you down. If you haven't done this stuff, by the way, already on the tutorials, I really expect you to do so. But I'm going to drag you down to this image over here of what we are going to refer to as PNF stretching. And I reckon you may not have heard of this before. I hope you have, and I hope you may have had a chance to have a go at it. It's a really spectacular form of stretching. And again, I hope that your teacher and your class, you're having a go at this, because it's really an intriguing thing to do, and I encourage you to take part in that alongside learning it here with me. But PNF stretching, first of all, the bad news. The PNF stands for something, and it's a bit of a mad word. Okay, so it's called I'm going to go slow with this. Proprioceptive. I'm going to try and make sure my spelling is my writing is clear. Proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. Now, you might look at a term like that and you might think, why would you call it that? And really, once you're familiar with these terms, you realize that really this is a description of the process. I'm not going to get too much into that concept. Perhaps you can reflect on that towards the end, how this concept actually describes the process that we're going to go through. But the first thing I want you guys to understand, other than being able to name this thing, and by the way, the good news is that PNF, as I understand it, at least as I record this, is good enough to get you the mark in the exam, so don't panic too much. But what we want to talk here, and what we want to realize first, if we look at this type of stretching, you should already be able to name the type of stretch which is going on in this image. And I want you to realize straight away that this is, at least to begin with, what we call a static passive stretch. Static passive stretch. You might think, well, I've heard of that. Remind yourselves, in fact, let me drag you up. We said previously a static passive stretch. We've got it over here, static passive. It uses an external force such as a partner or a Dynaband. Well, what have we got here? We've got a stretch using a partner, an external force creating the stretch. And just to be clear here, the stretch which is taking place is a stretch in the hamstring of this right leg of this male participant here. So that is going to be in that sort of area over there. So we've got a static passive stretch. Of course, the partner is applying force in this direction to cause that stretch to occur. We also, so if you like, we call this stage 1, static passive stretch. Well, I also want to know what stage 2 is. Let's say they hold this stretch, just say for argument's sake, they do this for 10 seconds, okay? After 10 seconds, the performer, the participant, this person here, is actually going to perform what we call an isometric, I'll say that again, an isometric contraction. Okay, so this performer here is performing an isometric contraction. You might think, James, what the heck is that? Well, basically, this guy, this big chap here, he's going to force his leg back in this direction. Now, if you think about how that would happen, that would involve a contraction of this same hamstring group on the back of the thigh. However, his partner, this person here, is going to resist that stretch. So even though he's forcefully pushing in this direction, his partner is going to balance out that force by resisting it in that area, in that position there. So in other words, the muscle is going to be working, but it's going to stay the same length. Okay, so we call that an isometric contraction. Now, something really interesting happens. Let's say this isometric contraction is done, just for argument's sake, for 8 seconds. This is high intensity work for the participant, by the way. Well, the next thing that will happen, just trying to choose the same pink that I had a moment ago. I think I failed. Yes, I have failed. The third thing that will happen now is that the performer will stretch again, but this time we say through greater ROM. Through greater ROM. Remember, ROM is range of motion. So what do we mean by that? We quite literally mean, let me just choose a colour which is going to work on this background. We quite literally mean that at the moment this leg is in this position, and this is the comfortable stretch for that participant in this stage 1, because the stretch reflex happens there. Well, once the isometric contraction has been done, the leg will actually stretch further. And again, I encourage you to participate in this yourself with the guidance of your teacher, and you will find exactly this happens. Not necessarily to this degree of change, but you're going to find that you stretch significantly further in the second phase. And you might ask then, well, how can that be? Well, of course, what's happening here is as the hamstring muscle stretches the first time, as we've said before, we have a stretch reflex, which prevents it stretching further. The isometric contraction actually switches off or inhibits that stretch reflex. Okay, so stage 4 is that we repeat this process. So again, we do the stretch, then we do the isometric, and then we stretch through a greater range of motion. And you might be thinking, no way, that's not going to happen. Try it. I promise you, you will get this impact. Okay, to some degree, you're going to get this change. Now, it doesn't mean you're more flexible permanently. It just means you're training at a higher intensity. Because if you're stretching through a greater ROM, that is a form of intensity from the FIT principle. It is a form of intensity. You are actually stretching through a greater ROM. And as I said before, I've got a mode of changing colours here, so why not? Let's change again. After the repetitions has been done, we need to understand that what is actually happening here is we are getting inhibition or switching off or delaying of stretch reflex. So the stretch reflex, that kind of protection methodology, which stops your muscles from overstretching, is being delayed to a greater point, to a greater stretch. And it's a really phenomenal methodology. Okay, strengths and weaknesses. Let's do strengths first. This is very effective. In fact, it's probably our most effective stretching methodology. You could make an argument for ballistic probably, but it's pretty good. And it causes adaptations. Because you are working at a higher intensity, it is effectively a form of progressive overload, okay? So therefore, we get adaptations, long-term changes if we train in this way. But there are some negatives. First of all, this is a very technical thing. You know, to get the forces right, to balance this all up and to do it safely takes experience, okay? So that is actually even potentially dangerous. And we also get the idea of misunderstanding, that the method is misunderstood. Now, I want to say something to you. When you go and do this for real and you're working with your partner, for example, don't be daft and think it's funny to push this leg too far on the first go. That would be a really dangerous thing to do. This muscle can damage very, very, very easily. So you want to ease your way into these positions and actually make sure that you get that right. But I really encourage you to have a go at it because it's a tremendous stretching methodology. You can do it with almost all stretches. This is the classic example, probably the one you'll do first. But there's loads of guidance on loads of different stretches you can do with the same methodology, not just on the hamstrings. That's all. Cheers.